Hi everyone, and welcome to Chapter 6 of the course. This is where we'll be focusing on visual storytelling and setting the stage for our characters. We're almost to the home stretch, and this is where we'll be learning some of the most important lessons. So let's just jump right in. This lesson will be about drawing thumbnails. You may remember me mentioning those in the previous video about story and character-driven illustrations. Here I'm going to elaborate on this a bit more. Thumbnails are basically quick, loose sketches where we plan out a pose or the staging of a scene. These are often small doodles that serve as a sort of miniature model we can work from, hence the name thumbnail. Think of it as a sketch before the sketch, the roughest preliminary step. Why are thumbnails so useful? When you have an idea for a drawing in your head, oftentimes when you first sketch it down, it doesn't always feel right. Sure, sometimes we might get lucky and nail a look on the first attempt, but more often than not, it takes a little bit of trial and error to get what we're imagining onto the page. By quickly sketching things out first, we can work out the right pose or composition before committing to a full illustration or comic. This can save you time with having to correct mistakes later on after you've spent more time on a finished sketch. Preparation is an important and yet overlooked step when it comes to illustration. Now, what is the right way to make thumbnails? Different artists may approach this step a bit differently, depending on how they draw or what they're drawing. Typically, we want to keep these simple and loose, like mine here. But some artists prefer to make their thumbnails more detailed, and if that works for you, then that's fine. Loose sketches will take less time, of course, than detailed ones will. Remember that this is a step just for ourselves, really. So most people won't actually see your thumbnail sketches, so they don't have to look great. I mean, mine are basically just stick figures here. So think of these more as guides to help get your idea down, and then you can refine it as you go along in the following steps. You can make as many thumbnail drawings as you feel necessary until you feel comfortable with your sketch. For some drawings, I'll make as few as 1 or 2 thumbnails, and for others, I'll make as many as 20. Once you have a thumbnail drawing that you're happy with the pose in, you can draw it again as a rough sketch, which will be the foundation that we build our final drawing on. In my thumbnail sketches, I don't worry too much about anatomy because I'm just focusing on the gesture, really. But in your foundational sketch, you may want to take anatomy into a little more consideration. And again, if you're somebody who likes to do tighter thumbnail drawings, there's nothing wrong with that either. Whatever works best for you. Again, the step is to help ourselves out. And that's basically how I thumbnail for poses. Now, when I'm thumbnailing for comic pages and whatnot, there's a few more things I have to take into consideration, and I'll show that to you. Here's how I make thumbnails. I have an example here of a comic page I'm starting, and as you can see, it's very loose and messy at this stage. In fact, at first glance, you probably don't even understand what's happening here. But these thumbnails, they're made for my sake more than other people's, so mine tend to look like chicken scratch like this. These sketches are only here to give us a sense of space occupied in each panel. Now, if you want a useful way to make your thumbnails work within the confine of a panel or page, you can use the rectangular marquee tool, which is right here on the side toolbar. If I hold it down on the elliptical marquee tool, you'll see I have this little dialog box here on the side, or this little drop-down menu, I should say. At the top, we have the rectangular marquee tool. You just click and drag it to your desired dimensions, and if you want to keep it a perfect square, you just hold down the Shift key. Once it's on, let's go to our brush. You can only draw within the confines of the square. Isn't that cool? Now I'm going to make more thumbnails here for this comic, and we're going to focus on maybe the panel where her and Madeline are playing piano together. I'm going to do a couple of these. As we work on these, we're not worrying too much about things like anatomy and perspective. That will come later as we refine these a bit more into the sketch stage as we lay out the rough pages. But for now, we're just trying to get a sense of the layout. Now you can see we have some nice loose sketches to choose from with different types of arrangements of characters that we can take into consideration as we move forward in the next steps. Mine are very loose, they're not pretty drawings at all, but again, I want to get the idea through to you guys that these don't have to look great. They only have to make sense for you. Think of these as just taking notes for drawing. What I do want you guys to take into consideration, however, as you do these things, are things like the character's silhouette, things reading clearly, and the use of space if you're filling the page or panel. Also, making sure there's enough space for the characters. So for example, here I have to make sure that we can see both characters' faces. So I work out different compositions where I have to figure out any issues, potentially, like the kickstand on the piano. We don't want that blocking Madeline's face. That's why it's important to do thumbnails, because it's much more pleasant to figure this out when I'm just doodling chicken scratch like this than having to rework a whole illustration that we've already spent an hour on. In the next video, we're going to talk about the poses that we'll need to be drawing for our characters and how to make them work in a sequence with key poses, as we like to call them. So thanks for watching.